Oh baby, did you miss me? Because I know you did. Welcome back to My Seminary Life. I'm your host, Brandon Knight. It has been a minute, but I would like to welcome you all to the start of our first ever summer school series focusing on the topic of cults. So how this is going to work is that over the next 5 days, that's right, it's not a Saturday, and that's on purpose. Over the next 5 days, we are going to be diving into the topic of cults. And the hope is that over the next few years, we're going to do this kind of week-long topical series on a different subject each year. Is not always going to be cults, and just as a way to free up some of my own time when it comes to the summer. And I'm kind of glad that I did this because it's been crazy busy already here in the month of June. So busy that I'm recording this in the 9th hour right before the episode is supposed to drop. That's how busy it is. I'm still way behind when it comes to my life, but I'm excited for this week as we dive into the topic of cults. This is day one of summer school, and we're going to be talking about UFO cults. The rest of this week, we're going to be looking very specifically at each day is going to be focusing on one individual cult, but today we're going to do more of a round robin, talking about a genre of cults, UFO-based cults that have some extraterrestrials involved in their belief system. And we're going to highlight, I think we got 3 or 4 of the UFO-style cults here to talk about today, but the rest of the week we're going to be focusing on one cult at a time. Before we get into that, though, I did want to take a couple minutes here right off the bat to give you all an update on something that's been going on in my life theologically. As I say often here on the show, I reserve the right to change my mind at a later date, right? This is, because that's part of what this show is. For those of you tuning in for the first time, My Seminary Life is not about trying to get you to go to seminary or make you think that seminary is the end-all be-all and that I'm like some apologist for seminary. I'm not. My approach to life and my approach to my faith is that I am a student, and there are several different ways that someone can learn how to do a thing. I have found that reading books, being in the classroom, learning under somebody is a way that I learn and grow. Personally, that's not necessarily the best way for everybody, but that is one that just seems to be one of the ways that I am wired to learn. The thing I want to talk about, though, is for the longest time, at least for the most part during the existence of this show and my involvement in the podcasting world, I have theologically defined myself as a reformed existentialist, and I'm here today to recant part of that. And before you all get your hopes up, no, it's not the existentialism part that I'm recanting. No, it's the reformed part. So take you on a little bit of a journey here. Having gotten out of college, I started moving more into the Reformed theology route, knowing already that I was a Calvinist, and having gotten really into the teachings of R.C. Sproul, Sinclair Ferguson, these guys who are Reformed theologians, and I really fell in love with this group, not because I thought they had all the right theology, although a lot of it did match up with what I believed, but because you had this tie to church history, to the catechisms, to philosophy, this thinking out and wrestling with scripture, a high value on scripture. It was a very intellectual pursuit of God, and this paired well with my existential side of my faith, where it's more relational, more experiential in how we grow in our relationship with God. The reason, though, that I have decided to shift away from identifying as a Reformed person is because I started, it's one thing to listen to a podcast. It's another to start actually interacting with people who identify in the ways that you do. And I started getting in with groups of Reformed guys my age who were very Reformed, and I did not like the company I was keeping. I apologize to anybody out there listening who's like very Reformed, and I'm not trying to make a statement that necessarily describes everybody who is Reformed. This group may have been living out more of the negative stereotypes that get brought up with Reformed people. I don't know. But I've heard it said before, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And I wasn't liking what my future was going to look like, because either I was going to be miserable for the rest of my life with the people I was surrounding myself with, because I was already starting to feel miserable, or I was going to become a theobro. That's just, sadly, it seems to be an inevitable path with some people who kind of get really hung up on Calvinism and postmillennialism and all these other things that it's like, I can't get hung up on these things because it's not as black and white. And I think that was another issue, is that it, as much as I wanted it to work well with the existentialism, it didn't, because it was, while the existentialism allowed for gray, the Reformed theology part didn't. It's black and white. It's sin or it's not. It's, so yeah, I'm stepping away from that. That's fun. Holding on to the existentialism. And also I've started dabbling a little bit into biblical mysticism as well. Not thrilled with all of the theology that I'm seeing in biblical mysticism, although I do think this group has gotten really bad press over the years from big evangelicals and, the people I just got done talking about. And let's not forget that A.W. Tozer was a mysticist, so let's just let that one sit there for a second, because he was a very, very high view of Scripture fella, and very tough. He's a tough man. But part of the mysticism that meshes well with the existentialism is, again, this whole like experiential aspects of God, and these things also, I think, although there are parts of my life that I'm still growing to become more like Jesus, these elements of my faith allow for emotion. I am an emotional person. And although there's part of my emotional life that is still growing and being sanctified and becoming holy, it's, in some parts of Christianity, there's like no room for emotion. And to show any kind of emotion is a sign of weakness, a sign of a lack of faith, a sign of, anything. Whereas it's like, this is the group that will welcome me, is the mystics, is the existentialists. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe we all are supposed to be like Spock as Christians. I don't know. We have books of poetry in the Bible, so I'm kind of, skeptical of the idea that we're not supposed to show any kind of emotion. But if this is going to allow me to be somewhat expressive, I'm going to go that way. Theologically, though, from like the intellectual standpoint, I think I just had to face the fact that you're going to find more Lutherans out there, but I'm kind of a closet Lutheran at this point. Like, I had to go back that the reason why I started falling into the Reformed faith was because of a mixed understanding of the Reformers and the Reformed denomination, or they're not even a denomination or a faith. It's a theological system. So it was because of Eric Metaxas's biographies on Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther that I started making this big shift. I kind of knew R.C. Sproul for other reasons, but it was those two biographies that really shifted me this direction. And I just kind of had to face fact that, like, I think I might be Lutheran. I don't know. I might be coming out of the Lutheran closet to you all right now. The awkward thing is that I also do really like the Anglican tradition as well. And I say that's awkward because part of the reason why the Anglican branch of Christianity exists was to be an alternative to Lutheranism. And Lutheranism exists partially as obviously an alternative to Catholicism, but also as a alternative to the Reformed theology, strong Calvinism thing. So like they all are like against each other and also like for each other at the same time. It's weird. So I think I'm like mostly Lutheran with like a splashing here and there of Anglican. I just haven't spent enough time with Anglican theology and thought outside of C.S. Lewis. I've had a little bit of like N.T. Wright here and there, and I want to dig more into him. But so yeah, that's all of my theological shiftings. Unfortunately, Anglo-Lutheran existential mysticist is nowhere near as easy to say as Reformed existentialist. So, one day when I start my cult, I'll come up with a way to shorten that. Segue. So let's talk about cults. So, like I said, in today's class on cults here during your summer school lessons, we're going to be looking at UFO cults. So, UFO cults are similar to any kind of other cult, except they believe in aliens. Now, just because somebody believes in aliens or thinks that they were taken into a spaceship does not make them part of a cult. For those of you who are coming in late, the working definition that we've used throughout the show as we've talked about cults here and there over the past few years is that a cult is a new religious movement that splintered off of a mainline religion to go its own path. That's kind of the working definition we use. So you've got something like Christian Science or Jehovah's Witnesses that split from traditional Christianity, or the Nation of Islam that split from traditional Islam. The problem with this definition is that it is not all encompassing. It doesn't include everybody. Because you look at something like Scientology, NXIVM, the Sarah Lawrence cult from a couple years ago, these groups did not splinter off from a main religion. They follow more of like a pseudo-psychology and went their own direction with it. Later this week, we're going to talk about Twin Flames Universe, which really doesn't splinter off of any one religion. Instead, it just kind of took a whole bunch of things and put it into one big pot. It's going to be a fascinating little conversation. So will 7M. We're going to be very, very relevant later this week when we review one of Netflix's latest documentaries, Dancing for the Devil. Wacky little episode that will be, featuring my wife Claire. It's going to be fun. You know it's always a good time when Claire shows up on an episode. So this is kind of the working definition. I've yet to come across a definition that covers everybody, so I don't know if it exists. But like I said again, a cult is a new religious movement that splintered off from a mainline religion to go its own direction. There's a couple other contributing factors, other kind of like warning signs, red flags to kind of look to. Typically, there is one leader that holds all of or 99.9% of the power and authority in the group. You do not question that person or ask any questions really at all. That person usually has some kind of secret knowledge. Salvation comes from this person alone. The mentality of the group is that their one little group is the one little elected group that is going to be saved from whatever doomsday thing is going to happen, which is also a common theme in a lot of cults, is that there is some kind of doomsday element. There's usually some kind of like hierarchical growing into something greater than yourself, something that kind of looks like sanctification but isn't sanctification. Again, you look at something like Scientology, Nexium, or Christian Science, that all kind of has this like, expanding your mind to become a greater person versus like becoming in the image of Jesus. When it comes to cults that specifically splinter off of Christianity, a couple other common factors that come up is that there's either denial of certain elements of Scripture or new canon being added. This is going to come up a lot here in a couple days when we tackle everybody's favorite cult to talk about, Mormons. So we're going to do a Mormon episode this week and talk about the fascinating history of all the additional books that they have in the Bible. Usually there's some kind of twisting when it comes to Jesus. You have like the Branch Davidians. David Koresh was calling himself Jesus. Also some kind of denial of the Holy Spirit, or a reductionist view of the Holy Spirit. Gwen Shamblin with Remnant Church had this, non-Trinitarian view of God, and that caused a whole kerfuffle with her weight loss program and was part of the reason why she started a whole church. So these are some of the, red flags on the field, contributing factors to what makes a cult a cult. In this case, when it comes to UFO cults, one of the big contributing factors for this genre of cults is aliens. There's some kind of element of, you're not trying to become like Jesus, or in like we'll look at here in a few days with Mormons, you're not trying to become a god. You're trying to become like an extraterrestrial. That is the higher being element that you are trying to become. Usually the leaders, instead of being Jesus or some kind of other thing, they're usually aliens incarnate here on our planet. And there's some kind of, quote, ascension coming where we're all going to be, well, not everybody in the group is going to be taken up into a spaceship and flown away safely because doomsday is coming. Again, a lot of like doomsday stuff comes up in cults, either like a literal doomsday, like an Armageddon kind of doomsday, or an existential doomsday, like Branch Davidians or Jim Jones with Jonestown, the People's Temple. Like an existential like threat is going to take them down, like MAGA. Anyway, political. Do you like my political material? I'm very brave. Now, here in this episode, we are not going to debate or talk about, are aliens real and are there UFOs? Briefly, I will say this. We're not going to talk about aliens because I think that is an episode for another day or another series altogether. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm not one of those Christians who's like, yeah, aliens aren't real. Like, I think this is a bigger conversation than what we can handle right here, and I'm trying to stay focused on the cult aspect, okay? And I know there's at least one of you. I know you want me to talk about aliens. I'm thinking about you right now, and if you've got your telepathy going, I'm thinking about you down there in North Carolina. Yeah, we'll talk about aliens at some point. I have talked about the aliens with you before on a different show, but we'll talk about aliens sometime more here on MSL. When it comes to UFOs, I personally, sorry, but sometimes there are some random things that are in the sky that we have yet to identify what those flying objects are, or whatever is the preferred scientific term now, because UFO has become like a distasteful term that's too sci-fi, pop culture, whatever. Anyway, unidentified phenomenon or something like that now. I don't know what it is. But yeah, it seems like we do have, just following the very letter of the definition of the word, yes, there does seem to be times where there are unidentified flying objects in the sky, and we should probably start taking that a little bit more seriously, both in the scientific realm and in the theological realm. But again, like aliens, I don't really want to go too much further on that topic, because I think we're getting away from what actually matters here today, and that is talking about 3 cults that identified as a UFO cult. So let's get started. So an honorable mention to get to first, though, before we get into our 3 groups, is Scientology. I cannot remember if this has come up before here on the show or not, but technically you could make an argument that Scientology could be a part of this UFO genre of cults, because it is technically in Dianetics and part of their... Is it in Dianetics? I can't remember now if it's in Dianetics, because that thing was so thick. But it is part of their doctrine. I'll use that word. It is part of their doctrine that those who are Scientologists are like part of an alien race that will one day be taken back to their actual home planet, which is kind of like the heaven of Scientology kind of thing going on there. It's an interesting little bit of doctrine that comes up in their teachings that seems to get ignored, kind of like how they're actually pro-life. That was in Dianetics. That part I do remember in Dianetics. Doctrinally, they are pro-life. But doctrinally, there is this element of Scientologists are aliens who are going to be taken home to another planet. Because let's not forget, before he created Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer. But it seems like this is a teaching that often gets dismissed, or isn't even like common when it comes to like practicing Scientologists. It's like part of the belief system, but some people really even doubt if that's supposed to be taken seriously or not. Scientology is very much grounded in, I shouldn't say grounded in reality, but it's very much grounded in the here and now. Your focus isn't so much on some future end goal, kind of like how some Christians get very obsessed with getting to heaven one day. The end goal of Scientology isn't really getting home to Krypton. I shouldn't make jokes like that. I apologize. But it is becoming the best version of yourself now in the flesh, not some later goal in life. So that's why, like, I don't really consider them part of this UFO group, although there is a little extraterrestrials when it comes to their group. All right, so let's get into now our 3 cults here. We have, first off, the Rallian movement. I promise I practiced these things before I got on the air. Rallian movement. So in the 1970s, a French journalist was visited by an alien, was renamed Rael, and was informed that at one point in time, aliens from another planet populated the Earth. Some of them got confused with being identified as gods, and now it was up to Rael and his group of followers that he was going to establish to build an embassy on the Earth for this alien species, so that way the like mixed breed and I guess they're not mixed breed, but the descendants of this original alien race and the original alien race could now be united. And contrary to the other two groups that we are going to talk about here in a moment, this group actually is still around. It's like a smaller thing. It's a smaller group, but this group is still around and is still trying to get an embassy together. And I kind of want to say more power to you, but when it comes to cults, usually there's some kind of bad thing going on behind the scenes. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about the Raleighans. So let's move on. They're trying to build an embassy for an alien species. That's kind of cool. Batting second, we have the Nuwaubians, also known as Amam. So this was a group that started way back like in the 50s or 60s by a con artist from New York, and was one of the few times where, there's this long going debate of like, who is most susceptible to coming into a cult. And honestly, it seems like sociologists and anthropologists have kind of agreed that there's not really, and psychologists have really agreed that there's not like one particular type of person who gets could get caught up into a cult, which is important for all of us who have never been in a cult to realize that you are just as susceptible. However, some cults do have a target audience. We're actually going to talk about that more tomorrow when Christian Ashley is on the show. But with the Nuwaubians, they did target African Americans. This was a very racially focused group that, yes, the leader of the group, he was not visited by this con artist guy. He was not visited by an alien. No, he was an alien. He was an alien from another planet who was establishing this new order of people here on the planet who were also a part of this very intermingling race of African Americans, African cultural elements, alien elements, and also Egyptology. One thing that happens often in cults is that there is a big pivot moment. There's like this make or break moment where something has to change or this is just going to all collapse. This normally happens when a cult claims that somebody will live forever and then somebody dies. This was a big thing with Scientology when L. Ron Hubbard died. With the Nuwaubians, though, they had the leader of this group would make these pivots, make these changes, not when they were in like crisis mode, but as basically a marketing ploy to try and get more recruits. Case in point, when they introduced this like Egyptology part and started building pyramids on their compound in, I think it was Georgia, the reason why they all of a sudden started adding in all this like Egyptian elements into their like way of life and teachings was because of the popularity of Brendan Fraser's movie The Mummy. It was like 1999, early 2000 at this point, and because of how big of a movie that was, he decided to start adding in all these ancient Egyptian elements into the aesthetic and teachings. It was an interesting hot mess of things, and you can actually learn more about it if you check out the show Cult Justice. It's on Hulu, originally made by A&E. Eventually what ended up happening with this group is that people started coming forward, people from inside the cult started coming forward with accusations of child abuse and child molestation by the leader. However, because they were on a compound and it was believed that they were heavily armed, and also there was a racial tension element there being a black community in the South, the U.S. government was worried they were going to have another Waco on their hands if they did not do this well. Because if you know your recent cult history well, it did not end well in Waco with people, the shootout with the American government, people dying, the compound burning down with with men, women, and children on the inside dying. Like, it was it was bad. And this event that happened in 1993 is what in part inspired the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. It was a retaliation against the U.S. government for handling that issue poorly. So, needless to say, this is like the next big. The U.S. government thankfully learned their lesson. Way to go, government. You actually learned a lesson for once. The U.S. government actually learned a lesson and decided, okay, we got to make sure that this doesn't happen again. How do we do that? Okay, so what they ended up doing, which when it comes to justice, you're thankful that justice does happen here. It does happen. That is the punchline. It does suck that they had to maybe not move as quickly as we all would like, but basically they staked out the compound until they could determine a time when the leader was going to leave the compound and they could snatch him off the property, which with David Koresh, that was probably never going to happen. But with this guy, they literally arrested him in the parking lot of like a Aldi or something. Like, he went out to like get some bubble gum, and they were able to safely arrest him in 2002. And he's been serving jail time ever since. I think at one point, though, he fell ill and they were trying to get him out. Let me see if I can verify if he is still alive or not. Hold on one second here, folks. Okay, so here's some of the fact checks. So Dwight York, which is his real name. I'm not going to even attempt to say any of his other names that he has gone by because I just will not say them well. He was convicted in 2004 on what has been the single most amount of charges ever levied against somebody, against an individual. The single most amount of charges on an individual who, with this charges of molestation, taking children over state lines for bad things, and racketeering. And he is serving. He is still alive. I thought he had passed away, but he's still alive. And he is currently serving in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison from now until 2150, I think is what it said. Yes, he is supposed to be in prison from now until the year 2120, which is probably my favorite part of our legal system. There's a lot of things to complain about when it comes to our legal system, but the the fact that like these ridiculous amount of time is out, and I know why that happens, because like you can get out early on good behavior, or petition for parole or whatever, like all these things. So you slap this enormous amount of time that somebody has to serve on them, and they're even on their best behavior, they're never going to get out of prison. So yeah, he is serving in prison until 2120. Technically, the group does exist. They have nowhere near the amount. I thought they also had shut down, but they are still around, and they are petitioning the U.S. government to release him because he was technically a general, or was listed as a general in Liberia from one of their past presidents. So they're trying to argue for diplomatic immunity to get him out of prison, but that is not working. So we have two UFO cults. We have one that's trying to establish an embassy for our ancestral aliens who populated this planet, and we also have a black nationalist group who are descendants of aliens and also ancient Egyptian relic stuff. But probably the most well-known of the UFO cults is, of course, Heaven's Gate. So Heaven's Gate started back in the 60s because, say it with me, folks, the 1960s was a breeding ground for new religious movements. Also the late 1800s. I don't make the rules, I just report them. So Heaven's Gate was founded by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, T and Doe, as they often went by. They had a couple different names, but that seems to be one of the more common names that they went by. They started this group in the 60s. There's a little bit of a vague mystery behind how exactly this all got started, because they went on a wilderness retreat together. They're married. They went on a wilderness retreat together, and when they came back, they had all this new teachings. It was interesting. It was but nobody really knows exactly what went on during this retreat thing that the two of them did. Were they, contacted by aliens? Were they tripping on acid? It's not really, it's very vague, even still to this day, what exactly went on during this trip that these two went on. But they went away together and came back with all this new teachings, and they actually had a hard time at first getting people to buy into the UFOlogy part of it, it was kind of this blend of new age mysticism kind of stuff with UFOlogy. They were having a hard time at first getting people to really buy in, show any interest, until one day they revealed that they are the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. And also aliens. They are aliens and also the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. They are aliens in that they have taken on human flesh, and their teachings would then change the person into the alien being that they are supposed to be. And the end of the world is coming. Of course it is. And they needed to prepare themselves for their final ascension when the mothership was going to come pick them up and take them back to their new home planet. It was this introduction of the two witnesses element, and as time went on, shifting more and more into some light revelation, biblical Christianity stuff, that the cult started to gain a little bit of traction. In time, it actually ended up being a pretty small group, 20 to 30 people, I believe. But that is another, I talked about this pretty recently, that is another common factor that shows up in cults for a long time, but I think we're actually kind of moving away from it, that it is this isolated group, very small. It seems like more and more the isolated and very small parts, they do still happen, but thanks to the internet, we're really moving away from those things. Anyway, again, more about that here over the next couple days, especially with Twin Flames here at the end of the week. Anyway, so when it comes to this, though, so what else does this? The question is, what else were this group doing? So it's interesting because they had to prepare for life as aliens, right? And this is interesting because there was this is common practice in cults, some kind of rewiring of the brain to start speaking another language. I talked about this when I reviewed Dianetics, that I had a hard time following it because L. Ron Hubbard just started using these other terms, and there was a glossary in the back, and I would use it, but it was hard to keep up because it's learning another language. And I think for those of us who have been Christians for a long time, we probably take that part for granted, that we can just toss words around like reconciliation, propitiation, other big fancy words, and people know what we're saying. But people on the outside of Christianity probably won't know what these words mean, But they had all these sci-fi sounding terms, and I've been trying to avoid saying sci-fi in all of this, but truly, like, they were taking terms from like Star Trek and other like science fiction based media and adopting that into like their normal speech, you know, pulling into the docking bay they were parking their car, you know, things like that. It's a fascinating look. And there was also this element of, you know, we're going to live forever thing. Well, Bonnie Nettles eventually dies. Okay. And this causes a big like tension moment that I've talked about before or earlier here on the show. And Marshall Applewhite does pivot, addressing the fact that she has decided to give up her mortal flesh to return to the spaceship to prepare the spaceship to come and get them. Now, it's probably a good time to bring in a trigger warning, although I probably should have led with that from the get-go. My apologies. I forgot about some of the stuff that came up with the Nuwabians, but the trigger warning here for those of you who are uncomfortable with the topic of suicide. So what exactly happened with Heaven's Gate? Well, as the group began to shrink more and more, the end of the world was not presenting itself anytime soon. They eventually began to realize that they needed to prepare themselves and look and prepare other people for the coming mothership. What was the coming mothership? Well, okay, as I'm rechecking my notes, I do have to make one change. The group got started in the 70s. So, sorry, they are not part of the long-standing group of people of new religious movements that got started in the 60s. My bad. But it was actually in 1997 when the comet Hale-Bopp was going to pass over the Earth. They believed that was going to be the mothership to take them to the next level, as that was what they referred to, the next level. That was the term that they used to refer to ascending to their next plane of existence. And in order to hop on the mothership as it was passing through, they committed ritual suicide. Everybody willingly. There is no sign of struggle among the people who committed suicide, as opposed to Jonestown, where as people investigated and types were played, you discovered that actually not everybody was really very willing to do what Jim Jones and his associates were trying to get everyone to do. But in this case, everyone killed themselves willingly in order to head on to the next level. And it's very sad because people died, and there was no, in the research that I've done into this group, there's little to no skeletons in the closet. There's no coercion, there's no abuse, there's nothing. It's just these people were so head over heels involved for their leaders. They were so invested in their leaders that they would very literally die for their teachings. So it's a very the UFO cult stuff is a very dark and very complicated part of the cult conversation. But the question at this point now, and the question that we're going to wrestle with in every episode of this series, is, does this matter? The question is, will I really run into somebody from a cult? And in this case, you would think, come on, Brandon, a UFO cult? That's so not like that can't be. You know, you'll always run into, you know, maybe some quirky people who believe in aliens, but you're not gonna run into somebody who truly is a part of a UFO cult. Well, I hope you don't have that attitude east of Dallas, Texas, because in a little town in, I think it's pronounced Marietta, Texas, all you Texans can correct me if I'm wrong, just east of Dallas, there is a cult, seemingly a UFO cult with a big online presence that is operating out of this little Texas town and owns a restaurant in town that apparently has really good food, or at least that's what I was reading online. Profundity Yours is this new age spiritual, in a way similar to very similar to Heaven's Gate. It's this mixing of new age mysticism with UFOlogy. There doesn't really seem to be much not really much by way of Christianity doomsday teachings, but there is a preparation talking about being prepared to join the intergalactic association of motherships or something like that. This is a fairly new group as well. Most of the articles that I was reading about this group are published circa 2023, so still very fresh, and was founded by a woman who is a social media new age guru, and apparently was very much like into the new age stuff, and then all of a sudden started bringing in a lot of this talk of like UFOs and spaceships, and how she's like a diplomat as part of this like intergalactic space group. And I will add, there is a little bit of Christianity because she has referred to herself as the Alpha and Omega. There does seem to be a little bit of a Messiah Jesus complex going on here as well. This is something to watch for, especially those of you in Texas. Again, they have a very strong online presence, and if you don't believe me, just go into the description of this episode because the website's there. They have a very strong online presence and a presence east of Dallas. So this is something to keep our eyes on. And I really hope that we can avoid, if we can avoid, a Heaven's Gate situation, or like with the Nubians, avoid a Waco-like situation or a Jonestown-like situation. We don't want people dying. There's already some stories coming forward of verbal abuse from the leader, Laura McMillans, I think is her name. Let me check that. Not Laura, Linda McGillis. So Profundity Yours is a newer group that we need to be keeping our eye on. And, I should start looking. I should start looking to see if there's like ways that we can get involved in protecting people from these kinds of teachings, or trying to be a part of the solution rather than just sitting here talking about it. I should work on that this week. We should work on that this week. So could you run into a UFO cult to this day? Yes. You can find the link in the description if you don't believe me. Yes, you could run into somebody from a UFO cult. They really do exist still, folks. And spoiler alert, all throughout this week, the answer to that question is going to be yes. And it may surprise you how. But that's it for today's episode. Again, we'll be back tomorrow with Christian Ashley to talk about the cult with the most complicated name in history. So come back tomorrow to find out as we continue our summer school series. With that in mind, as always, head down to the description of this episode to check out all the links to all the important things. If you would like to financially support the show, please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/MSLpod. You can make a one-time donation. You can donate towards, we got a little fundraiser going on right now to try to get some funds together to get a new laptop. Or you can join one of our monthly support tiers. Everybody who supports the show at the $9 a month tier gets a shout out. So thank you, Lori, for supporting the show. Another way to support show is to head on over to our merch site, which is also linked down there in the description. And if you're new, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram at My Seminary Life Pod. We have a YouTube channel with original content, and also the interviews get uploaded to there as well. And if you got some more information about cults and how maybe we can be the solution rather than just talking about it, you can always drop me a line, email seminarylife@gmail.com. This is Brandon signing off, reminding you as always that theology is for everyone, so keep on studying.